The gym smelled like rubber mats and old sweat. That thick, humid air that clings to your skin in spaces where men push their bodies past comfort. It was 1965, late afternoon in Oakland, California, and the place hummed with the particular energy of serious athletes. The rhythmic thud of heavy bags, the metallic clink of weights meeting their rests, grunts of exertion punctuating conversations. Bruce Lee stood near the far wall, 5 feet 7 inches of coiled precision, 24 years old, wearing simple black training pants and a fitted gray shirt that revealed shoulders wider than most men expected on his 135-pound frame. His movements were economical, deliberate. He was demonstrating a technique to 3 students, his hands flowing through the air in patterns that looked almost casual until you understood the physics involved. The kinetic chains that could transfer force from foot to fist in fractions of a second. Most people in the gym knew who he was by then. The Chinese martial artist who'd been making waves, teaching Zhongfan Gong Fu, what he'd later refine and rename Jeet Kune Do, to anyone willing to learn, regardless of race. This was radical. This was, to many in the traditional martial arts world, borderline heretical. The door swung open with enough force to draw attention. A man entered, and the space seemed to contract around his presence. 6 feet 4 inches tall, 285 pounds of professional wrestler physique, shoulders broad enough to block doorways, arms thick as fence posts. His name was Jake Morrison, and he carried himself with the swagger of someone accustomed to being the largest person in any room. Blonde hair cropped military short, a jaw that looked carved from granite, wearing jeans and a white t-shirt stretched across his chest. He surveyed the gym with the kind of casual territorial assessment predators make when entering new environments. His eyes found Bruce Lee and stopped. Someone near the front, a regular named Tommy Chen, noticed the look, that particular kind of look. The calculation, the dismissal, the smirk forming at the corner of Morrison's mouth. Morrison walked across the gym floor, his footsteps heavy, purposeful. People stopped what they were doing. Conversations died mid-sentence. The atmospheric pressure changed the way it does before thunderstorms. That electric anticipation of collision. He stopped about 8 feet from Bruce, close enough to make his intention clear, far enough to maintain the pretense of casual inquiry. Arms crossed over his massive chest, he tilted his head slightly, the way someone might examine something mildly curious but ultimately insignificant. "This is the famous Bruce Lee." Morrison's voice carried across the suddenly quiet gym, loud enough to ensure an audience. It wasn't quite a shout, but it had the projection of someone trained to work crowds. "The guy everyone's talking about." Bruce turned slowly, deliberately. His face remained neutral, but something shifted in his posture. Not defensive. Aware, his student stepped back instinctively, creating space. "I'm Bruce Lee." His accent carried the particular cadence of someone who'd learned English as a second language but mastered it with precision, each word chosen carefully. His voice was calm, measured, carrying across the space without volume, a different kind of power than Morrison's theatrical projection. Morrison uncrossed his arms, let them hang loose at his sides in a gesture that might have looked relaxed if you didn't notice the tension in his shoulders, the slight forward lean of his stance. "I've been hearing things. People saying you're some kind of revolutionary, that you can do things nobody's ever seen before." He paused, let the words hang. "I've been in the wrestling business 15 years, worked with the strongest men in the world, fought guys from every discipline. Judo, boxing, karate, all of it." He took a step closer, then another. "And I gotta be honest with you, friend. You look a little small." The word landed with precision. Around the gym, people tensed. "I mean, what are you? 5'7", 130 pounds, soaking wet?" He shook his head, a theatrical gesture of bemused concern. "How's a guy your size supposed to handle real power, real strength? You ever gone up against someone who outweighs you by 150 pounds? Because in the real world, size matters, weight matters. This philosophy stuff, these fancy hand movements, they're great for movies, great for demonstrations, but against a real athlete." He spread his hands, palms up, in a gesture of mock helplessness. "I'm just saying, there's physics involved here. Force equals mass times acceleration. You can be as fast as you want, but if you're hitting someone with 135 pounds behind, and they're coming at you with 285. The math doesn't work out in your favor." The silence in the gym had weight now. Physical presence. Tommy Chen felt his jaw clenching. He'd been training with Bruce for 8 months, had felt firsthand what that small frame could generate. But he stayed quiet, watching Bruce's face, which remained perfectly still, not blank. There was too much awareness in those eyes for blankness, but controlled. Bruce didn't respond immediately. He let the silence extend, expand, filled the space Morrison's words had tried to dominate. When he spoke, his voice was softer than before, which somehow made it carry further. You've been in wrestling 15 years. That's significant experience. There was no sarcasm in the statement, no edge, just acknowledgement. You've developed considerable skill, considerable strength. These things are valuable. Morrison's smirk widened slightly, mistaking acknowledgement for concession. But, Bruce continued, and something in that single syllable shifted the atmosphere, you're operating from assumptions. The assumption that power comes primarily from mass. The assumption that strength is measured in pounds and inches. The assumption that conventional physics tells the complete story of human combat. He took a step forward, not aggressive, invitational. You mentioned force equals mass times acceleration. This is correct. But acceleration is key. Acceleration is about speed, yes, but also about distance and time, about efficiency of movement, about eliminating wasted motion. His hands moved as he spoke, not demonstrating techniques but illustrating concepts, flowing through the air like water, finding paths of least resistance. A punch that travels 12 inches in the same time. Your punch travels 24 inches, has already struck its target before yours has reached halfway. And if that punch channels force through precise angles, through bone structure alignment rather than purely muscular contraction, the mass behind it becomes almost irrelevant. Morrison's smirk faltered slightly, not vanished, but flickered. I'll tell you what, Bruce said, and his voice carried the particular quality of someone making a genuine offer, not issuing a challenge. Rather than discuss theory, let's make it practical. 6 seconds. Give me 6 seconds, and I'll demonstrate what I'm describing. Not to hurt you. There's no value in that, no honor in injuring someone to prove a point, but to show you what's possible when you stop limiting yourself to conventional assumptions about strength and power. Around the gym, the energy shifted again. People leaned forward. This was unprecedented. Bruce wasn't known for public demonstrations of this nature, wasn't known for showing off. Everything he did carried purpose, intention. Morrison's face cycled through several expressions in rapid sequence. Amusement, confusion, something that might have been respect, trying to surface beneath layers of pride. Then his jaw set, the decision made. 6 seconds. He laughed, but it sounded forced now, performed for an audience that was no longer entirely on his side. Okay, little man, 6 seconds. Show me what you've got. But when those 6 seconds are up and you've bounced off me like a tennis ball off a wall, maybe you'll understand why size matters. Bruce nodded once, a small, economical movement. Tommy, he said, turning slightly toward his student, please time this 6 seconds exactly. Tommy Chen pulled his watch up, positioned his thumb on the second hand. His heart was hammering. He'd seen Bruce move, had felt the force Bruce could generate, but this was different. This was public. This was his teacher putting everything on the line against someone who outweighed him by 150 pounds and stood 9 inches taller. Take whatever stance makes you comfortable, Bruce said to Morrison. Defensive, offensive, whatever feels natural. I'm not going to hit you in a way that causes damage, but you'll feel the force. You'll understand the principle. Morrison spread his stance, lowered his center of gravity as much as his massive frame allowed, brought his hands up in a modified wrestling guard. Not quite boxing, not quite grappling, but something hybrid that leveraged his size. His face had lost the smirk entirely now. Whatever else he was a professional athlete. And professional athletes recognize when the game has become serious. The gym held its breath. Ready? Bruce asked. Morrison nodded, jaw clenched. Now, Bruce said quietly. Tommy's thumb released the second hand. What happened next occurred in layers of simultaneity that would take minutes to describe but transpired in the duration of 3 heartbeats. Bruce's weight shifted. Not dramatically, not in the explosive burst people expected, but in a subtle flow that seemed to gather momentum from the ground itself, rising through his calves and thighs. Coiling in his hips, channeling through his core, his feet slid forward less than 8 inches, but the movement carried the entirety of his intent, his mass, the focused totality of decades of training distilled into pure kinetic transmission. His hand, his right hand, moved in a straight line from his hip position to a point precisely 3 inches from Morrison's sternum. Not a punch in the conventional sense. No wind-up, no chambering, no telegraph of intention. Just sudden presence where absence had been. The contact, when it came, sounded like someone slapping a leather couch. A thud, dull and solid. Morrison's 285 pounds lifted. Not metaphorically. Literally. His heels came off the mat, his entire weight distribution shifted backwards and upwards simultaneously, his spine arching involuntarily as his body tried to process force it hadn't anticipated could exist from that source. His arms, which had been up in guard position, flew out to his side seeking balance that had vanished. His face registered shock, pure, unfiltered, instantaneous shock, mouth opening, eyes widening, the mask of professional swagger completely shattered. He traveled backwards through space, 4 feet. His heels struck the mat first, but his momentum was still carrying him, and his legs couldn't catch up to his torso's trajectory. He sat down hard, his massive frame hitting the padded floor with enough force to make the heavy bag chains rattle across the gym. He sat there, legs splayed in front of him, hands on the mat behind him, chest heaving, staring up at Bruce with an expression that contained no trace of his earlier condescension, just profound, almost childlike bewilderment. "Time," Bruce said softly. 3 seconds, Tommy breathed, his voice barely audible. 3 seconds. The silence that followed was cathedral-like in its quality. Sacred, reverent, not because of violence witnessed, but because of possibility revealed. Everyone in that space had just seen their understanding of physics, of human capability, fundamentally challenged. Bruce walked forward slowly, closing the distance Morrison had just traveled through the air. He stopped about 2 feet away, and then he did something that would resonate far beyond that moment, far beyond that gym, far beyond anything anyone present expected. He extended his hand, not in triumph, not in mockery, in genuine offering. "Are you hurt?" His voice carried authentic concern. No edge, no satisfaction, no ego, just the question of one human to another. Morrison stared at the offered hand, at this man who'd just defied every assumption he'd carried into this building, every certainty he'd built a career on. His face was cycling through emotions too rapidly to catalog. Shame, confusion, anger at himself rather than at Bruce, wonder, something that might have been gratitude breaking through layers of bruised pride. His hand reached up slowly, almost tentatively. It dwarfed Bruce's, engulfed it completely when they made contact. Bruce pulled, and despite the size difference, Morrison rose smoothly to his feet. Bruce's structural positioning and leverage, doing more work than his actual mass should have allowed. They stood face to face, or rather, face to chest, given the height differential. Morrison's hand went to his sternum, pressing gently, feeling the point of impact. His face showed he was still processing, still trying to understand what his nervous system had just experienced. That he started, then stopped, started again. How did you? Bruce's face remained neutral, but there was kindness in his eyes, not pity. Pity would have been an insult, but genuine compassion for someone whose worldview had just been reconstructed in 3 seconds. "Let me explain what you just felt," Bruce said, and his voice had shifted into a different register now, not demonstration. "Teaching. When I made contact, I wasn't using arm strength. The arm was just the delivery system. The force originated from the ground, transmitted through bone structure alignment, femur, pelvis, spine, scapula, humerus, radius, ulna, carpals, metacarpals, each bone stacked in optimal position to transfer kinetic energy with minimal dissipation. My muscles weren't pushing, they were guiding." His hands moved as he spoke, showing the chain of connectivity the pathway force had traveled. "This is why mass becomes secondary. If I had punched you using conventional mechanics, shoulder rotation, pectoral engagement, tricep extension, yes, my 135 pounds would have been the limiting factor. But that's not what happened. What happened was I let the earth punch you. I became the conduit, not the source." Morrison was listening with an intensity that transformed his entire presence. The swagger was gone. The performative confidence had evaporated. What remained was raw, undefended curiosity. The look of someone encountering something that rewrites fundamental assumptions. "The reason you lifted off the ground," Bruce continued, "is because the force vector was angled slightly upward, maybe 5 degrees. Not to throw you, but to disrupt your root, your connection to the ground. Once that connection breaks, weight doesn't matter. You could have been 185 pounds or 385 pounds. The result would have been identical." He paused. "Let that sink in. In Chinese martial arts, we have a concept called Ting Jin, listening energy. It means understanding force, understanding how bodies move through space, understanding the mechanics underneath the mechanics. What you felt wasn't magic. It wasn't mystical. It was pure physics. But physics applied with precision. Most people never explore because they rely on attributes they were born with, size, strength, speed, rather than developing attributes that transcend natural gifts. Morrison's hand was still on his sternum, still processing. I've been hit by heavyweight boxers, he said slowly, his voice carrying a wondering quality. Professional wrestlers. Street fighters. I've been in real fights, not just performance, and nobody has ever moved me like that, not even close. Because they were all relying on the same principles you were, Bruce said. Mass, momentum, muscular force. These things work. I'm not saying they don't work, but they're incomplete. They're operating within conventional limits. And conventional limits are just agreements we've made with ourselves about what's possible. When you start questioning those agreements, exploring what exists beyond them, you discover that human capability is far more expansive than most people imagine. Around them, the gym remained silent, but it was an engaged silence now. People weren't just watching, they were learning, absorbing, having their own assumptions challenged by proxy. Morrison looked down at his hands, massive hands that had gripped and thrown men for 15 years. Looked at Bruce's hands, smaller, more refined, calloused in different patterns. I came in here to embarrass you, he said quietly, and the admission cost him something. His voice cracked slightly. I heard people talking about you, about this Asian guy who thought he could revolutionize martial arts, and I thought it was hype. I thought you were another fraud selling ancient wisdom to gullible white guys looking for meaning. He met Bruce's eyes directly, and there was naked honesty in his face now. I wanted to expose you, make you look small, literally and figuratively. I know, Bruce said simply, no judgment in the words, just acknowledgement. Why didn't you hurt me? Morrison asked, and the question carried genuine confusion. You could have. I felt it in that moment of contact. I felt that you could have put that force into my solar plexus. Could have cracked ribs, collapsed my diaphragm, but you held back. Bruce was quiet for a moment, and something shifted in his expression. Not quite sadness, but a recognition of something deeper than martial arts. Deeper than technique. Because hurting you would have taught you nothing except that I can hurt people, he said finally, and that's not a lesson worth teaching. Anyone can hurt someone weaker than themselves. Anyone can use superior skill or knowledge to destroy. That's easy. That's the path of ego and fear. He gestured around the gym, at the students and onlookers, at the space they all shared. Real strength, real power, is about building people up, not tearing them down. It's about showing people what's possible, expanding their understanding of their own capability. If I had hurt you, you'd leave here angry, resentful, possibly planning revenge. Your ego would be wounded. And wounded egos don't learn. They defend, they attack, they close down. His voice softened further. But if I show you something that challenges your understanding without destroying your dignity, then curiosity opens. Questions arise, and questions are where growth lives. I don't need to prove I can hurt people. I need to prove that there are ways of being powerful that don't require hurting people. Because the world has enough violence, it doesn't need more. What it needs are demonstrations of strength that uplift rather than destroy. The words settled into the space like seeds finding soil. Morrison's face was working through something, some internal process that was physically visible in the tension of his jaw, the moisture gathering at the corners of his eyes. I've been doing this all wrong, he said, and his voice broke completely now. A 285-pound professional wrestler standing in a gym in Oakland, crying in front of strangers because someone had shown him mercy he hadn't earned and didn't deserve. 15 years, and I've been thinking about strength all wrong, about power all wrong, about everything. Bruce didn't look away from the tears, didn't offer false comfort or try to diminish the moment. He let Morrison have his realization fully, completely, with the respect of witnessing someone's transformation without trying to manage or control it. Not all wrong, Bruce said gently. You've developed real skill, real discipline. These things have value, but maybe incomplete, maybe operating from assumptions that limited what was possible. Morrison wiped his face with the back of his massive hand, a gesture that somehow made him look younger, more vulnerable. Could you, he started, stopped, gathered courage. Would you consider training me? Teaching me what you know? I don't have much money, but I could. Bruce held up a hand, stopping him. I don't need money. What I need are students who come with humility, with genuine desire to learn, with willingness to question everything they think they know. You've just demonstrated all three of those qualities in the last 5 minutes. He smiled slightly, the first real smile since Morrison had entered. Yes, I'll teach you. Morrison's face transformed. Relief, gratitude, something approaching joy breaking through. Thank you. Come back tomorrow, 7 a.m., wear comfortable clothes. Be prepared to feel incompetent and lost for several months while your body and mind relearn fundamental principles. I'll be here, Morrison said with absolute conviction. 6:30. I'll be here at 6:30. Bruce nodded. Then he turned, addressing the entire gym, which was still frozen in witness to what had just unfolded. What happened here today isn't about me being special. It's not about Bruce Lee having supernatural abilities. It's about any human being willing to question conventional limits and explore what exists beyond them. Every person in this room has the same potential, not to become me, but to become the fullest expression of themselves. That's the real lesson. Not that I can generate force beyond my weight class, but that you can too, all of you. The silence broke slowly, like ice thawing. Conversations resumed, but quieter than before, more thoughtful. People returned to their training, but with different energy, more questioning, more exploratory. The atmosphere had fundamentally shifted. Tommy Chen approached his teacher, still clutching his stopwatch. Sifu, he said quietly, that was 3 seconds. You said 6 seconds. Bruce glanced at him with that slight smile still lingering. I know, but if I had told him 3 seconds, he wouldn't have believed it was possible. 6 seconds was within his framework of possible. 3 seconds exceeded it. Sometimes you have to let people step into the water before you show them how deep it really is. Underscore 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 a. Jake Morrison showed up the next morning at 6:15. He trained with Bruce Lee for the next 8 months, 3 times per week, sometimes more. He never regained the swagger he'd walked into that gym with. But he gained something more valuable, genuine confidence that came from understanding rather than assumptions, from capability rather than size, from wisdom rather than ego. In his wrestling career, he stopped relying purely on his mass advantage, started incorporating principles of leverage, angle, and efficiency. His colleagues noticed, "You're moving different." They'd say, "More dangerous," somehow harder to read. He never told them exactly what had changed. How do you explain in a sentence that your entire understanding of strength and power had been reconstructed by a man 150 pounds lighter than you? How do you convey that real power isn't about domination, but about the choice not to dominate even when you can? 3 years after that day in the gym, Morrison opened his own training facility. He taught wrestling, yes, but he also taught philosophy, concepts he'd absorbed from those early morning sessions with Bruce. He taught that size was an advantage but not a destiny. That real strength included knowing when not to use your strength. That the goal wasn't to destroy opponents but to reveal their potential while revealing your own. He had Bruce's words painted on the wall of his gym in simple black letters. Real strength is about building people up, not tearing them down. Students would ask him about it, about those words. He'd tell them the story, though it took years before he could get through it without his voice cracking at certain parts. About walking into a gym full of pride and assumptions. About being moved through space by someone he'd dismissed. About being shown mercy he hadn't earned. About having his worldview reconstructed in 3 seconds and his dignity restored. In the minutes that followed, that day changed my life, he'd tell them. Not because Bruce Lee proved he was better than me. That's not the lesson. The lesson is that he showed me I could be better than I was. That all of us can be. That strength without wisdom is just violence waiting for an excuse, and that the strongest choice is usually the most merciful one. Underscore 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 und. In 1973, when news reached Morrison that Bruce Lee had died suddenly at age 32, he closed his gym for 3 days, hung a picture of his teacher in the entrance, sat in the empty space, and wept for hours. Not just for the loss of a teacher, but for a world that would never get to experience what Bruce could have continued to offer. But the lessons didn't die. They multiplied. Every student Morrison taught carried fragments of what Bruce had shown him. Every person who trained at his facility absorbed the philosophy painted on the wall, whether they knew the story behind it or not. And those students taught others, who taught others, who taught others, creating ripples that spread across decades, across continents, carrying the essence of what had happened in a gym in Oakland in 1965. Today, Morrison is 78 years old, still teaching, still sharing the story, still honoring the moment when someone half his size showed him what real strength looks like. He keeps a photograph in his office, one of the few pictures taken of him and Bruce together, probably from 1966 or 67. Two men, vastly different in size, standing side by side, both smiling. Morrison's hand is on Bruce's shoulder, but there's nothing condescending in the gesture. It's respect, pure, uncomplicated respect. Underneath the photo, handwritten in Morrison's careful script, is a question. Who in your life have you dismissed because they didn't match your expectations of what strength looks like? Visitors see it, read it. Sometimes they answer aloud, sometimes they just sit with the discomfort of honest self-examination, because that's what the best lessons do. They don't let you off the hook. They don't offer easy answers. They hold up mirrors and ask you to look honestly at what's reflected there. Underscore 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 underscore. 6 seconds, that's what Bruce offered. 3 seconds, that's what it took. But the impact that's still unfolding, still rippling outward through the people Morrison taught, the people they taught, the people who heard the story and questioned their own assumptions about strength and size and power. That's the real demonstration, not what happened in 3 seconds on a gym floor in 1965. What's happened in the 60 years since? What's still happening now, in this moment, as you read these words? So here's the question for you. Who have you dismissed? Who have you underestimated because they didn't fit your framework of what capable looks like? Who have you written off because of size or background or age or appearance? And here's the harder question. When you win, when you're proven right, when you have the power, when you have the advantage, what do you do with that victory? Do you use it to crush, to humiliate, to establish dominance, or do you use it to teach, to build, to show someone what they could become? Because here's what Jake Morrison learned that day, what he spent the rest of his life trying to embody. Anyone can destroy. That takes no wisdom, no discipline, no strength of character, just willingness to cause pain. But to have the power to destroy and choose not to have the ability to humiliate someone and choose instead to educate them, to take someone at their lowest moment and offer them a path upward, that's power that changes the world. That's strength that outlives your body. That's the kind of legacy that echoes across generations. 3 seconds to knock someone down, a lifetime of commitment to build them back up. Which one defines real strength? Bruce Lee knew the answer. Jake Morrison learned it. Now the question is yours.